Unmasking my wife's lover in front of everyone was the darkest and most revealing moment of my life. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal that consumed me, but the chill down my spine when I realized how much I was manipulated, played like a piece on a board where I didn't even know the game was happening. She smiled, a subtle smile, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning that only I understood at that moment. And then, the revelation came: every detail, every movement, every affectionate gesture, was nothing more than a choreography rehearsed to perfection for a calculated outcome. The shock in the room was palpable. Faces frozen in expressions of horror, voices murmuring disbelief, and I, standing there, like a statue, reliving in seconds the months of doubts, the sleepless nights, the little clues I ignored, blindly believing in the kindness of those who shared the bed with me. I had the proof in my hands, the messages, the photos, the open confessions that finally opened my eyes to what was happening right under my nose. And when I exposed everything, I thought that the greatest pain would be hers, that she would beg for forgiveness, that she would regret it bitterly. But no. She looked at me, not with regret, but with a frightening calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The room, previously full of laughter and carefree conversation, was now a scene of barely concealed tensions. Everyone was waiting for the explosion, the scandal, the shattering of what seemed to be a perfect life. But instead, the silence was cut by a cold, calculated sentence that I would never have imagined hearing. She was ready, as if she knew I was going to unmask her, as if she had rehearsed her reaction so many times that nothing I said or did would catch her by surprise. And in that moment, I realized that I was not the victim I thought I was. I was just a pawn in her cruel game, a game she had been playing for much longer than I could imagine. I've never felt so betrayed, so exposed. The pain of infidelity was sharp, but the real stab came when I realized that she had planned every detail, orchestrated every move, waiting for the moment when I, blindly trusting, would confront her in front of everyone. And while I thought I was revealing a devastating secret, it was she who was about to make the final move, a move so unexpected that even now, as I look back on those moments, I still feel the shiver running down my spine. I unmasked her lover. But what she revealed in return, well, that's the part no one will ever forget. The morning in Orlando began with the sky tinged orange, a gentle breeze swaying the palm trees and the distant sound of increasing traffic. The house, located in an upper-class suburban neighborhood, was the perfect portrait of a carefully planned life. The garden was always well kept, the grass impeccably trimmed, colorful flowers arranged precisely along the stone path that led to the main entrance. Inside the house, however, the details were even more meticulous, reflecting the personality of those who lived there. Everything was harmoniously decorated, with expensive furniture and art objects that conveyed a sense of order and perfection. Robert McAllister, a 42-year-old man, tall, with brown hair that was already beginning to show the first strands of gray, was the owner of that house. An executive at a technology company, he had built his life from scratch. Ambitious and determined, Robert believed that hard work and dedication were the secrets to success, both in business and in his personal life. Married for 15 years with Emily, an elegant and always well-presented woman, he believed he had the life of his dreams. Emily, aged 38, was the type of wife that everyone admired, attentive, affectionate and dedicated to the home. She was the center of attention at neighborhood parties, always involved in social activities, charity events and gatherings with friends. But behind all the facade of perfection, something began to change. Robert noticed the small changes first, almost imperceptible. Emily, who had always been punctual and organized, began to be late for events, citing last-minute commitments. Evenings, once filled with long, intimate conversations, began to be replaced by uncomfortable silences and excuses about tiredness. Robert tried to ignore these signs at first, believing they were just the normal pressures of everyday life. After all, he himself was often busy with meetings and business trips, leaving little time to worry about such details. However, the small changes began to accumulate. Emily, who had never been much interested in technology, was suddenly constantly on her phone, exchanging messages that, when asked, claimed to be about charity events or conversations with friends. There was a growing detachment, a subtle but present coldness that Robert couldn't ignore. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to believe that his wife, the woman he shared so many years of his life with, could be hiding something from him. The nights became long for Robert. He would find himself awake, staring at the ceiling, turning over in his mind all the moments when he noticed something strange, but which at the time he had dismissed as irrelevant. There was the time Emily mentioned a new friend she met at an event with a slight hesitation in her voice, or the awkward smile she gave when she said she was going to work late organizing a fundraiser. Small details that, isolated, meant nothing, but together, began to form a disturbing picture. To try to escape the doubts that consumed him, Robert decided to focus even more on work. But the more he tried to distract himself, the more suspicions grew. He began paying attention to Emily's conversations on the phone, noticing the way she smiled and changed her tone of voice when someone specific called. He noticed that she always left the room to answer certain calls, and when she returned, there was something different about her, a lightness that he hadn't seen in months. One night, when Emily went out for a meeting with friends, Robert, overcome by a restlessness that he could no longer contain, decided to follow her. He felt ridiculous, like an insecure teenager, but his intuition told him there was something more going on, something he needed to see with his own eyes. Following her at a safe distance, he saw her stop at a restaurant, where she met a man. They sat at a table away, and Robert, from inside the car, watched as the two laughed, talked intimately and exchanged looks that he hadn't seen in a long time at home. He didn't confront Emily that night. Instead, he returned home feeling empty, his heart heavy with the confirmation of what he feared. Suspicions became a painful certainty, and he knew he needed more proof before taking any action. In the days that followed, Robert began quietly investigating, reviewing old messages, checking bank statements, and even monitoring Emily's movements when she said she was at meetings or events. Meanwhile, Emily continued her life as if nothing was happening, unaware that her every step was being watched, that every word she said was being analyzed. The weight of truth piled on Robert's shoulders, a truth he didn't know how to face. He knew what was coming would change his life forever, but he had no idea that when he uncovered the betrayal, he would discover that there was much more at stake than just his wounded pride. Robert's plan was underway, and he knew he would need to be meticulous. It wasn't just about exposing the betrayal, but about doing it in a way that there was no doubt, that the truth was clear and unquestionable to everyone. He organized every detail, preparing himself for the moment when he would finally confront Emily and her lover. But what Robert didn't know was that Emily was also planning her own moves, with a goal very different from what he could imagine. As the date of the confrontation approached, Robert felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. He was about to face the truth, but he still didn't fully understand the game he was about to play. As time passed, the tension between Robert and Emily became almost palpable. It was like an invisible electric current that ran through the rooms of the house, a silent discomfort that they both felt, but that neither dared to mention. Robert continued his silent investigation, collecting information that would confirm his suspicions. He was not willing to make the mistake of acting hastily. He needed to make absolutely sure that when he finally confronted Emily, everything was prepared, with no room for doubt or excuses. The days continued in an almost unbearable routine for Robert. He pretended to be normal while his thoughts buzzed with plans and hypotheses. His behavior, although careful, did not go completely unnoticed by Emily, who, with her keen perception, noticed the subtle changes in the way he looked at her, as if he were trying to decipher a riddle. But Emily, always astute, showed no disquiet. She continued her active social life, involved in events and dinners, maintaining the image of a dedicated wife. She was an impeccable actress, moving gracefully through social circles while Robert watched closely. It was during one of these events that Robert found the opportunity he had been waiting for. A charity dinner organized by one of Emily's friends, an elegant event at a luxury hotel in Orlando. Emily insisted that Robert accompany her, and he, without giving any hint of his intentions, accepted. He knew that Emily's lover would also be there, and that made the event the perfect occasion to observe their behavior up close. During the evening, as the guests circulated around the reception room, Robert noticed the furtive glances and discreet smiles exchanged between Emily and the man. They were being cautious, but Robert, his senses sharpened with suspicion, didn't miss a single detail. Dinner proceeded without apparent incident, but the real test would come later. Over the next week, Robert put the final phase of his plan into practice. Using the evidence he had already collected, he hired a private detective to follow Emily on her outings and confirm what he already knew. The detective was experienced and discreet, and within a few days he brought back overwhelming evidence, photos and videos of Emily and her lover together, meetings that took place in remote locations, where they believed they were safe. Robert now had what he needed in hand, but how he used this information would be crucial. Determined to definitively unmask Emily, Robert began planning an event where everyone would be present. He decided that the best way to expose the betrayal would be at a party organized by himself, an event celebrating his wedding anniversary. The ironic symbolism of the occasion was not lost on him, but Robert was willing to do whatever was necessary to ensure that Emily could not escape the consequences of her actions. Preparations for the party began, and Emily, completely unaware of what was to come, dedicated herself to the event as always, choosing the buffet, flowers and invitations with the same zeal as in previous years. Meanwhile, Robert worked behind the scenes, preparing every detail of his reveal. He selected the most incriminating evidence and planned the exact moment when everything would be revealed. I knew that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The betrayal would be irrefutably exposed, and the masks would fall, showing the true face of everyone involved. Finally, the night of the party arrived. The house was impeccable, elegantly decorated, full of lights and soft music. Friends and family gathered to celebrate what everyone believed to be an important milestone in the couple's lives. Emily looked radiant, dressed in a dress that highlighted her classic beauty. She greeted guests with a smile that, in Robert's eyes, seemed more fake with each passing minute. But he remained calm, waiting for the right moment to act. As the night progressed, Robert watched Emily and her lover, who was also present, disguising their uneasiness with a mask of civility. They exchanged furtive glances, as always, without imagining that this would be the last game of hide and seek they would play. When the clock indicated that it was time to make a toast, Robert raised his glass, drawing the attention of everyone present. The conversation stopped, and everyone turned to him, waiting for the affectionate words that always accompanied his speeches. But this time, the words that came out of Robert's mouth were different. Instead of praise and good wishes, he started talking about trust, loyalty, and the promises made at the altar 15 years ago. The tension in the room increased as he, slowly and calculatedly, began to unfold the events of the last few months. Emily, noticing the tone of the conversation, turned pale, but maintained her composure, not yet fully understanding what was about to happen. And then, at the moment that seemed designed to make the biggest impact, Robert brought the evidence to light. The photos, the messages, the videos. Everything was revealed there, in front of everyone, in a sequence of facts that left no room for denial. The silence in the room was piercing, all eyes turned to Emily, waiting for a reaction, an emotional breakdown that never came. Emily stood there, straight, unshakable, as if she had already expected this. And while Robert believed he had won, he didn't know he was about to face Emily's final move. At the back of the room, the lover watched everything with a cold expression, and it was at that moment that Robert realized that something was out of place, something he hadn't anticipated. The tension was increasing, and what was about to be revealed would turn that night into a true emotional battlefield, where the consequences would be much more devastating than Robert could imagine. The silence that followed Robert's revelation seemed to weigh heavily on everyone present. The evidence, presented in an unquestionable manner, caused a reaction of collective shock. The murmurs of astonishment began to grow, but Robert, with his gaze fixed on Emily, waited for what would come next. For him, that moment was the culmination of months of anguish, distrust and pain. But what he didn't expect was Emily's coldness, who remained standing, staring at him without any trace of remorse or regret. Emily adjusted her hair, a slow, deliberate action, and then, amidst the silence that dominated the room, she finally spoke, her voice firm and clear, without the slightest hint of hesitation. "Did you really think this would take me by surprise, Robert? That exposing this in front of everyone would make me fall apart?" His tone was calm, but there was a hint of disdain, a tone that made Robert's stomach turn. He felt the ground open beneath his feet, but he stood firm, trying to understand what was happening. She took a step forward, her stance imposing. "Do you think I didn't know? That I wasn't aware of every move you made, every message you found? I let you believe you were in control, Robert, because I knew you couldn't resist putting on this show. But what you didn't realize is that, from the beginning, I was preparing for this moment." The guest's eyes, which had previously been fixed on the tests, now turned to Emily. Surprise and discomfort were written on every face. Robert felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. "What are you talking about, Emily? How can you be so calm about all this?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Emily smiled, an icy smile that made Robert's blood run cold. "You never understood, did you? All of this wedding, was a big play. A show in which you believed you were the protagonist, but in reality, you were always a supporting character. I knew you would figure it out. It was just a matter of time. And while you were busy gathering this evidence, I was preparing for the end of this act, and I planned every detail so that when that happened, I would be in a position to gain much more than I did. You could imagine. The tension in the air was unbearable." Robert tried to process what she was saying. "Are you insinuating that," he began, but was interrupted by Emily, who raised her hand, as if to silence him. "Yes, Robert. I knew this marriage was doomed to fail. But I also knew I could take advantage of it. So while you were spending sleepless nights trying to figure out what I was doing, I was preparing myself for what came next. While you thought you were watching me, I was accumulating evidence to secure my advantage in the divorce. Documents, financial records, all carefully filed so that when you finally confronted me, I was ready to take it all from you." The shock on Robert's face was immediate. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. You used me all this time," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Emily shrugged. "Let's just say I did what was necessary. You were always so focused on your ambitions, on your work, that you never realized what was right in front of you. I knew our marriage wouldn't last, but I also knew you would never accept a peaceful separation. So I prepared everything so that when the confrontation came, I would come out on top." The room was in a state of unbearable tension, the guests caught between the shame of others and the morbid fascination with the unfolding events. Robert, on the other hand, felt like he was trapped in a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He thought about all the nights of doubt, the moments he wondered if he was overreacting, the attempts to save his marriage. And now, it all seemed like a cruel joke. He had been manipulated the entire time. So it was all a hoax? Robert asked, trying to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed his confusion and pain. "Our marriage, our life together, none of it meant anything to you?" Emily gave a small sigh, as if she was dealing with a child who couldn't understand a simple lesson. "At first, it did. There was a time when I thought we could be happy together. But that changed. You changed. All that mattered to you was your work, your achievements. And I adapted. When I realized that our relationship was fading, I started planning my exit." Robert felt a lump form in his throat. He knew Emily had been distant for years, but he never imagined she was capable of something like this. "Don't you feel anything? No guilt? No remorse?" he asked, trying to find some spark of humanity in her. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Guilt? Remorse? Why would I feel that? Robert, I did what was necessary to survive. Deep down, you know we were never really together. You were married to the work, not me. And I just took advantage of the opportunities that emerged. It's that simple." Emily's words pierced Robert like knives. He had gone into that night believing he was in control, but now he saw that he was the one being played the whole time. And the final revelation was yet to come, a truth so devastating he couldn't even imagine it. But before he could say anything, Emily, with that icy smile, prepared to throw the final card that would bury any hope Robert might have had of redeeming himself from that situation. Emily turned around, picking up her bag that was on a nearby table. She opened it slowly, as if preparing for a calculated gesture. The room, now in an almost sepulchral silence, watched his every move. With a calm that bordered on the sadistic, Emily pulled an envelope from her bag and held it up, attracting the gaze of Robert and everyone present. "You thought you had it all under control, didn't you, Robert? But there's always something more, something you never see coming." She held out the envelope to him. Robert hesitated, but took the object, his shaking hands betraying tension. He opened the envelope carefully, pulling out the contents. It was a pile of documents. As his eyes ran over the words, his shocked expression turned into one of confusion and horror. "What is this?" he asked, unable to believe what he was reading. Emily tilted her head slightly, her eyes shining with dark satisfaction. "These, dear, are the documents that prove that you, in fact, have no control over anything. Contracts, agreements, transfers of ownership, all carefully planned to ensure that when you tried to overthrow me, I already had everything prepared for my victory." Robert looked at her, feeling bile rise in his throat. You transferred everything into your name," he stammered, barely able to form the words. "Not just for my name, Robert," she replied softly. "But also for the name of a third party. Someone you know very well. Someone who has been by your side from the beginning, but who you would never suspect." Robert looked at her, a feeling of growing dread taking over his body. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Your partner, Robert. Your oh-so-trusted partner. He and I were in this together from the beginning. Every step you took to expose me, we had already predicted and planned. While you thought you were investigating and watching us, we were a step forward, ensuring that when the moment came, you lost everything." Robert's mind was spinning. Your partner. Someone he always trusted blindly. Emily's betrayal was devastating, but discovering that she was in league with someone so close, someone he had placed his trust in business, left him completely devastated. He felt a wave of nausea as he realized his entire world was falling apart. "That can't be true," he muttered, staring at the documents in his hands but not really seeing them. Emily continued, undeterred. "And while you were distracted by your suspicions and attempts to catch me, he took care of everything on the business side. Bank transfers, shares, properties. Everything was done so that by the time you tried to expose me, it would be too late too much. Now, darling, you have nothing. Not your business, not your home, not even your dignity." Robert felt the weight of those words fall on him like a hammer. All his work, all his years of effort, everything was lost. He had underestimated Emily's coolness and intelligence, and now he paid the price. But more than the material loss, it was the betrayal that devastated him. The double betrayal, from his wife and his partner, was something he could never have predicted. Emily approached him, looking directly into his eyes, without any trace of compassion. "Did you want to expose me, Robert? Did you want to humiliate me in front of everyone? Well, you did. But what you didn't realize is that, in the end, I'm the only one who wins. And now, you're going to live with that reality for the rest of your life." The hall was completely silent. The guests, who had previously been shocked by the revelation of the betrayal, now looked at Robert with a mixture of pity and horror. He had lost everything in a game he didn't even know he was playing. And at the center of it all was Emily, triumphant, having meticulously and remorselessly destroyed her life. Robert felt his strength leave him. His vision began to blur, and he had to hold on to a nearby chair to keep from falling. The world around her spun, and Emily's words echoed in her mind, hammering mercilessly. He realized, at that moment, that there was no reversing what had happened. He had been completely defeated, and the weight of that defeat crushed him. Emily walked away, leaving Robert in a paralyzing state of shock. The lover, who had remained silent the entire time, now approached Emily, taking his place beside her. The couple looked at Robert for a moment, as if waiting for a reaction, but he was frozen. There was nothing more to be said, nothing more to be done. They had won, and Robert was defeated. With one last look of contempt, Emily turned and, accompanied by her lover, left the room. Robert, lost in his own misery, felt that the ground beneath his feet had been ripped away, leaving him adrift in a sea of hopelessness. Robert remained motionless as the sound of Emily and her lover's footsteps faded into the distance. The room, now filled with uncomfortable murmurs and pitying looks, felt small and suffocating. He could barely process what had just happened. The weight of defeat was crushing, and the public humiliation he thought he had prepared for Emily turned against him in a brutal way. But as the initial shock began to wear off, a new wave of emotions began to emerge, a mixture of anger, frustration and despair. He had lost more than his pride. I had lost everything I believed to be important. As the guests began to disperse, still stunned by what they had witnessed, Robert felt the urgent need to escape, to find some refuge where he could reorganize his thoughts and decide what to do next. He left the party without saying a word, ignoring the inquisitive looks and unspoken questions. As he left the house, the night air felt heavy, filled with the bittersweet smell of his defeat. Walking through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, Robert desperately tried to make some sense of it all. How could he, a man so careful, so meticulous, have been so completely deceived? Emily and her partner's betrayal wasn't just a blow to her confidence, it was a shattering of everything he believed to be real. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to predict their actions, but now he found himself faced with the harsh reality that he had been manipulated by those he trusted most. Arriving at a small park, Robert sat down on a secluded bench, away from the house lights and curious eyes. He ran his hands over his face, trying to erase the feeling of despair that dominated him. But as the minutes passed, his mind began to turn to something different. Something deeper and more unsettling. Robert knew he couldn't just accept what had happened, not without trying to find some kind of redemption, some way to take back control of his life. But how? The moral dilemma before him was immense. On the one hand, there was the option of moving on, accepting your defeat and trying to rebuild what was left of your life, even if that meant starting from scratch. But the prospect of living with the knowledge that he had been defeated so completely, and that those responsible for his ruin would go unpunished, was unbearable. On the other side, there was the temptation to seek revenge, to use what little he had left to destroy those who betrayed him, even if it meant sinking deeper into darkness. Robert knew that any action he took from that point on would be risky and potentially devastating, not only for himself, but for everyone around him. But he also knew he couldn't live with the idea that Emily and her partner had won. He needed to find a way to turn the tables, to expose the true characters of those who betrayed him, even if it cost what was left of his own integrity. As he sat there in the cold of the night, the moral dilemma intensified in his mind. Each option seemed equally destructive, and the line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. He knew that any choice he made would have profound and irreversible consequences. The question now was he willing to sacrifice what was left of his morality to ensure that those who betrayed him paid for what they did? Or could he find a way to move forward without becoming consumed by the desire for revenge? With these questions burning in his mind, Robert felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. There was no longer a clear path forward, and any decision he made would lead him to a point of no return. The only certainty he had was that, regardless of his choice, his life would never be the same. He was about to make a decision that would define not only his future, but also the legacy he would leave behind. Robert returned to his house in the early hours of the morning, with a clear mind and decided on what needed to be done. He spent the next few hours in a state of cold tranquility, organizing what was left of his life with surgical precision. His movements were quick and methodical as he collected the last pieces of a puzzle that only he could put together. When morning came, he was ready to execute the final plan he had formulated during the long and lonely night. In the days that followed, Robert disappeared from social circles, leaving Emily and her lover to believe they had won. Without any apparent dispute over the divorce, Emily moved forward with the proceedings, confident that she would emerge from the situation with everything she had planned. She saw no need to fear any retaliation. Robert looked defeated, resigned to accepting his new reality. Little did she know that he was moving the final pieces of a game she believed to be over. On the morning scheduled for the final divorce hearing, Emily entered the courtroom with an air of quiet triumph. Her lover was at her side, both prepared to consolidate their victory. However, as soon as the proceedings began, an unexpected twist of papers occurred. Robert's lawyer, until then silent, presented new documents, evidence that contradicted Emily's version. These documents, meticulously collected by Robert, exposed not only Emily's betrayal, but also the fraudulent scheme that she and her lover, with the help of Robert's partner, had orchestrated. The room was filled with suffocating tension. Emily realized, too late, that she had underestimated Robert. The evidence was irrefutable: illegal bank transfers, fraudulent agreements, and even compromising correspondence between her lover and her partner. Robert had spent the last few days gathering silent allies, including some of the court's own employees, who were more than willing to help expose the web of lies. Emily, who had always maintained a facade of control, began to lose her composure. The lover, realizing the seriousness of the situation, tried to escape from the room, but was intercepted by bailiffs who were already aware of the scheme. Robert's partner, whose participation in the crimes had also been revealed, was arrested the same morning, without even having the chance to defend himself. Emily, in turn, saw her world fall apart. What once seemed like an assured victory turned into a public nightmare, with journalists' cameras capturing every detail of the fall of a woman who thought she was invincible. The judge, upon reviewing the evidence, had no choice but to void all financial agreements and grant Robert victory in the divorce. Additionally, Emily was accused of fraud, perjury, and conspiracy, crimes that ensured she would spend the next few years facing legal battles. The woman who believed she had masterminded the perfect coup now found herself alone, with her reputation destroyed and her future uncertain. Robert, on the other hand, kept his head high as he left the courtroom. He was no longer the naive man who believed in the goodness of everyone. He had lost a lot, but he had gained something more valuable: the peace of knowing that he had faced his demons and emerged victorious. He walked away from it all, selling what was left of his company and moving to a small town where he could start anew, far from the ghosts of the past. Meanwhile, Emily and her lover faced the consequences of their actions. The lover, who believed he had escaped unharmed, was convicted of conspiracy and spent years in prison. Emily, with her fortune dilapidated and her name ruined, found herself abandoned by all those who once surrounded her. She began to live in obscurity, far from the parties and events she loved so much, trapped in a life of regret and loneliness. In the end, each of them reaped what they sowed. And Robert, although marked by the scars of betrayal, finally found a new beginning, far from the shadows of the past, but with the certainty that he had done justice for himself, without compromising his own integrity.